The following program contains scenes and language of a frank and explicit nature. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, and welcome to Film Jitsu, the podcast that wields films like deadly weapons. We are your hosts. I am Jay.
And I am Mike.
On this episode, I've cursed Mike to spend over 2 hours of his life watching 1976's King Kong, the first of many big-budget reimaginings of the 1933 classic giant monster movie, and considered by most to be the worst. After hearing his thoughts on the movie, we'll list off our bottom 5 dangerous animals to keep with the theme of Kong, and follow that up with a game of Kick 2 Pick 2, where we pit 4 films against one another with the aim of tossing 2 forever into the Phantom Zone, where they'll never be seen again. But before any of that, let's travel back to 1976, when the Twin Towers were still standing proud in New York City, and roll the trailer for legendary producer Dino De Laurentiis' version of King Kong.
Journey to an exotic land and discover one of the world's biggest screen legends and Jessica Lange. It's the spectacular remake of the 1933 classic.
Listen, there is a girl out there who might be running for her life from some gigantic turned-on ape.
A non-stop action adventure and Oscar winner for Best Special Effects. Jeff Bridges, Jessica Lange, and Charles Grodin star in King Kong.
Mike, there's a lot to talk about with the 70s version of King Kong, whether it's the acting debut of the positively gorgeous Jessica Lange and the recreation of the scene from 1933 where Kong peels away her clothes. There's the appearance of a bewildered Jeff Bridges as the film's chief protagonist. There's their decision to use animatronics and blue screen for the effects instead of stop motion. And then, perhaps most notably, the switch made by the filmmakers, allegedly made at Dino De Laurentiis' request, that Kong climb the South Tower of the World Trade Center instead of the Empire State Building. It's a lot. So I ask you, when the final credits started rolling, what was the biggest takeaway for you? Was it any of what I just mentioned or something else?
The biggest takeaway for me in this episode was that I couldn't wait to find out a little bit more about why you chose this film for our Bad Movie podcast, because I came away really enjoying this dumb movie.
No.
I did.
You can't be serious. You really did?
I really did. I came away enjoying the sheer popcorn entertainment of this thing. Maybe it was the right thing at the right time, both maybe for me personally and also the time that the film was made. I think it's kind of amazing that we went from 1933 to 1976 without a real King Kong remake. So a lot of time had passed and they were able to do a lot of interesting things filmmaking wise in the time in between. And so after some popcorny, schmaltzy performances, all of the Rick Baker special effects, I had a good time. Also,
wow.
Jessica Lange is a smoke show in this movie. So there is a lot to talk about. I think I understand all of the criticisms, but I was able to overlook them enough to have fun with the movie.
Wow, that's wild. That's an amazing take on it. Not what I expected at all. I found this movie to be fun as well, but I can see all of the criticisms as being valid. The thing that I struggle with the most, and I think I struggle with this in almost every version of King Kong, is just the central premise of a giant ape sort of being someone that we're supposed to sympathize with when it just looks really, really fake the whole time. I can say that there's some good artistry, but it's really fake. I mean, even in the 1933 one, that's movie magic. Absolutely.
Right,
that stop motion by Willis O'Brien is incredible. But when you see the giant animatronic hand come down and it's sort of, it's like, gripping her, and then it pulls her up, and it's a bad blue screen that doesn't quite work with the face, and it's really challenging to buy into the narrative in general. You didn't have a problem with it, though.
Well, I think because it's a known story, but I agree with you. Ultimately, I have the same problem accessing this story in that I guess I just don't ever care about a big fake monkey, no matter if it's animatronic or if it's stop motion or if it's the wonder of Peter Jackson. I don't ever end up caring about that central character. I will say I came away from this movie pleasantly surprised with the attention that Jessica Lange's character gets in the film. Fay Wray was sort of just a screaming damsel in distress in that movie. And in here we get a character with a little bit of substance, a little bit of nuance. Certainly Jessica Lange taking her opportunity seriously and really trying to act in this movie. In, again, what is a tough job of looking at the giant monkey and trying to exude feelings for it. We could only see what we were supposed to see. I can't imagine what it looked like for Jessica Lange in the actual room. So for her to be able to step forward and put out what I think is a really good performance was kind of surprising.
I struggle with Lange's character a lot. Dwan. It's not Dawn, it's Dwan. I really struggle with her because she's very challenging to understand as a person. She's sort of hanging on the Charles Grodin expedition leader. She immediately gloms onto him because he's like the alpha male on the boat. But then soon, of course, she becomes enamored with Jeff Bridges' character. You know, Jeff Bridges, he stows away on this thing, right?
Right.
Because he wants to go to this mysterious island where he thinks that the cloud of smog that's around it is carbon dioxide from a giant animal.
There are all kinds of things that might account for the excess CO2. For example, one would be animal respiration.
Turn the lights on.
What? Where do you come from? Animal breathing. Animal? Are you crazy?
That was a stretch.
Some science. Here's some science for you.
Perhaps even less likely is Jeff Bridges stowing away on a ship and then just showing up at a meeting and not immediately being tackled to the ground.
It's not that they all just look at him and go, where did he get the t-shirt from?
Unbelievable. He participates in the meeting. Like if there are minutes, he's in the minutes. And then at the end of the meeting, they're like, pardon us. Also, by the way, who the fuck are you?
It is such an odd thing. Bridges is well-versed in everything. He goes to like something like Princeton or something like that. He knows a little bit about all these different topics that are completely unrelated. He just seems to be an expert in all things. And yet he falls for this ditzy, materialistic kind of... I found her very challenging to root for in many respects. I like the fact that she had empathy for the monkey, sure. But at the same time, I'm just like, she goes wherever she's led.
Maybe this is me giving the film too much credit, but I actually saw her character as being both literally and figuratively lost at sea. She was found just sort of floating out there, and then she meets up with this people, and the same thing, she sort of floats from person to person, place to place, even resigning herself to the monkey's affections at a certain point, which we could maybe talk about now because that was a little peculiar. But I think it was one of those things where by the end of the movie, I at least came away feeling like this was a character that had heart. And even though she was lost and didn't really know who she was and was trying to identify herself through all of these other characters, I did feel like she mattered as a person in the story and not just as a MacGuffin.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on it. The idea of her literally and figurative being lost at sea is a really valid description of the character and by far the best read that I could have possibly applied to it. So nice work by you there.
Thank you, sir.
I'm still not entirely sure I care.
also right there with you. I'm not sure that I care either. And before we move too far away from Jessica Lange, because I'm sure we're going to have a lot of the technical parts of this movie to talk about, I do think we should talk about the peculiar choice to have there be what I would say are really sensual moments between her and Kong. The scene where she's ended up in the water and he picks her up in his hand and he's blowing her off, which by the way is like Harry and the Hendersons funny in that moment, right? But she's sort of writhing in, it's a very orgasmic scene.
It is. It's very, very peculiar scene. His eyes is the most expressive moment in the entire film for this monkey, this ape costume. And his eyes are so big and brown at that one moment.
Yeah, they look like what I would look like if I was looking at Jessica Lange in the palm of my hand.
And the thing that I was thinking about is, this thing's never seen the right side of a breath mint in its entire life. That's gotta stink.
Fair play. You know what? Always pragmatic, you. I wouldn't have even thought of that. You're right.
Oh my Jesus, and she's writhing around in the air of it. Are you serious right now?
It's one of a couple of scenes like that, because we have a few moments where she and Kong touch, and it's a little bit more titillating than you would expect to be. It certainly doesn't make a lot of sense for the character. And then even by the end, there was almost a moment, the final time the giant hand comes through a window and picks her up, it was almost as if she gave herself to Kong in that moment. I couldn't tell if they were supposed to play it like she didn't see the hand coming, or if she had just resigned herself to being this possession of Kong's. It was weird.
That kind of goes with what you were talking about her being lost at sea and not really having any personality of her own. She just goes wherever she can to survive. It is always, though, an aspect of the Kong story.
Right.
This savage beast, this indigenous creature, this tie to the past. And it's very masculine, right? Like the idea of it climbing a giant tower is very phallic.
Right.
So, I mean, like, there's all this stuff going on, and the conquering the woman or achieving the woman, and the woman being the death of the masculine. Right. You know, there's a lot of really weird themes that are going through all of this. And I don't know that anyone that was working on the film really understood much of it.
I wouldn't say that that was the part of the story they were interested in. I don't know that Dino De Laurentiis was much of a themes guy necessarily. I think they were really excited to build a giant monkey and see if they could get a giant monkey in here. And I'll tell you one thing, by the way, when you make a movie called King Kong, just show me the fucking monkey.
1 hour in, baby.
We all know why we're here. Making me wait an hour to see King Kong is like making me watch 60 minutes of Shia LaBeouf before the first fucking Transformer shows up. Nobody would do that. Nobody would sign up for it. Nobody would agree to it. Just give me the monkey.
I think there were a lot of big actors in that first hour. And then it all kind of takes a back seat to the monkey.
When really, I could have gone for some more of Captain Clark Griswold's dad.
John Randolph, the ship captain, Ross.
I know. All I could think of was, I wanted Jeff Bridges to turn to the captain and say, you know, you taught me everything I know about exterior illumination. And the end of the movie for me, I'll tell you, this is how you know you're really a horror guy. There is a flash sequence in New York where the subway is about to hit Kong. And I went, hey, is that Crazy Ralph from Friday the 13th? And I had to look it up. And yes, it is character actor Walt Gorley who played Crazy Ralph. And he is maybe a second and a half. And I thought, you know what? If I got anything out of this movie, at least I stuck around long enough to know that I can still spot Crazy Ralph just with a second and a half of screen time. I felt good about that.
The tricky part of it is that not a lot happens before King Kong shows up. It's very much an interesting story, but it's not a King Kong story. And there aren't any of those prehistoric animals like in Jackson's or even in the original, the 1933 version, where you get those. You get one snake, but again, it's really far off into the film.
Jason, the snake almost ruined the whole movie for me.
It's awful. Yeah.
It was so unforgivably bad. In a movie that pretty early on, I gave myself over to the effects, to the technology, and decided to just roll with it. I'll tell you that if our main reviews weren't immune from the bottom 5, that goddamn snake would be on my bottom 5 dangerous animals. It was unforgivable that it made it into the movie.
This movie can't get out of its own way when it comes to the special effects. And I know that's a bit of a limitation for 1976. I get it. But when you think about some of the special effects that were out there, you think about something like 2001, when you take care and attention and you're not just turning something around for $1, which, let's be real, Dino wanted the quick buck. So
always does.
Yeah. And I think they had a very good, accomplished director in John Guillermin who seemed up to the job of being able to bring good talent to this thing.
Mm-hmm. My complaint about the movie, you mentioned the director Guillermin. My complaint is not the filmmaking, because I have to say that watching a movie made in 76, shot on film, made me kind of miss movies that look like this way. The scale of this entire movie is impressive.
It is.
Everything is big. Everything feels big. And I don't mean bombastic. I mean vast. Like the ocean scenes, you really feel like they are just out in this big, wide nothing. The first time we make it onto Skull Island and we meet the natives of Skull Island, it is this huge set piece with all of these extras and these elaborate costumes, and it feels big. You feel like there is somehow a whole culture there in the screen. And then, of course, you get the sort of prehistoric landscapes of Skull Island itself. This whole movie, everything feels big in a way that is cohesive with the story that they're trying to tell. Now, all of that, though, then hinges on this technology. And I have to say, my complaint with the technology wasn't the technology itself. It was how heavily they leaned on it time and time again. That big giant hand picking up Jessica Lange, if that had happened one time, you would have gone, whoa, that was neat. But we get the giant hand picking up Jessica Lange 4, 5, 6 times to a point where like, you can't show me that technology that many times without me just focusing on how it looks fake. It pulls you out. And there's a number of those things throughout the movie. I complain about not seeing the monkey for the first hour, but then you see too much monkey.
Yes,
for the whole rest of the movie after that.
That's right. And that hand, when she pushes it, it has that rigidness of something that isn't organic. The movie was made for something along the lines of $24 million at the time, which translates to about $137 million budget in today's dollars.
Right.
I got to say, it looks like it cost at least that much, if not more. I can see the craftsmanship of Rick Baker and Carlo Rambaldi. I think that they did some really good work. Apparently, Rambaldi built a full-size animatronic robot.
Yeah, 40-foot Kong robot
that they could only use for like 2 shots.
And you can see where they are too. You see, you're like, oh, that's the giant robot. Okay, there it is. It does not look great.
Yeah, that's a real struggle. I mean, those guys are super talented, especially Baker, who went on to do American Werewolf in London, amongst many other things. I mean, all sorts of character makeups and such.
Most people in horror, you're like either a Rick Baker or a Tom Savini guy. But if you're smart, it's both. That's for sure.
And they won the Oscar for this too, right? Those guys.
And not, though, without some controversy, because I know that Rick Baker didn't quite get the credit in the film that he was supposed to.
That's right.
Suffice to say, Rick Baker went on to be the big deal that we all know him to be. So it worked out okay for Rick in the end.
He moved out of the ape suit.
He did. I think maybe the worst part of this movie, close second to the snake fight, was when they unveil Kong in New York and he's got the big crown on his head. They've put a big crown on. It's like a sparkly crown at the New York unveiling. I can't even get a bandana on my 2-year-old pug, and I'm supposed to believe that somebody managed to get this crown on Kong's head, like it's some sort of giant Burger King situation. It's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous, and that might be what this entire movie is at the end of the day. It might just be a giant paper Burger King crown on the head of the King Kong story.
So what was it like for you watching this in present day, some 20 some odd years after the Twin Towers had fallen, and seeing them so prominently displayed in a film?
Yeah. Well, especially the plaza. You don't usually see that in film. When we see the Twin Towers in movies, we usually get the skyline, right? That Manhattan skyline.
You're absolutely right.
And for me now, any movie that was set in New York between when the towers were built and when the towers came down, there's a shot of the towers in that movie somewhere. It's something that actually it's a game I play when I watch a movie. I'm like, ooh, there's that didn't feel good shot now, And so it was really interesting, I think, to have so much of the action take place on the ground floor, because yes, Kong climbs the towers. Yes, the towers were really impressive. The miniatures they used were exact replicas based off the blueprints of the actual towers and all of that. But as a millennial who was in my second year of college, I remember really vividly the day that those towers came down. And so it was interesting for the first time to see so much action and violence take place in that spot. I wouldn't say that it was upsetting to me, but it definitely just colors the film differently.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I wanted to know how it felt to you, because here's a piece of what is essentially remake exploitation. And it's an action drama. Then you're in New York City. It is 1976. Those are the new towers. It is perfectly staged. It's actually pretty exciting at that point, I found.
I think so.
Yeah. Even though the special effects still didn't work for me, I was still invested in it. And I wasn't sure if the towers played a bit of that for me. It was the part that architecture was there. And it was a reminder of them being there. And in some way, it gave the scene more interest for me. Not because I was mourning anything and not because I missed them per se, but because they existed. They were solid. They were there. And they were absent any terrorist or Yay America or jingoistic sort of context.
Yeah, they didn't mean what they mean now.
Correct.
In fact, they meant something very different. They meant something very different at the time. Yeah, and especially, I think you can't help but watch a scene set on those towers without thinking about it the whole time. And especially, we have Kong at the top, who, for a movie that was what it was through its entire running time, then just becomes an absolute splatterfest.
Oh, yeah, man.
In its final moments, as these helicopters are just shredding into Kong. I think I get used to, in a lot of these big monster movies, that bullets don't affect big monsters. But this thing, it's just, I mean, there are chunks of meat flying off of him. I think had Mario Bava got the opportunity to direct this movie the way he had been offered, that might have been the scene we got anyway. It was really gory, blood pouring down, especially in those shots where we see Jessica Lange sort of at the foot of Kong. So now we have these massive legs and this blood pouring everywhere. And then ultimately Kong falls, and he falls down the tower and lands. And that imagery means something different to modern audiences. And so did it ruin the movie? No, it certainly didn't do a whole lot to make it better. I think for me, I wouldn't say it took away from the impact of the scene. And I think in some way I kind of appreciated being that up close and personal with the towers, because you don't usually get to see it that up close in a film. You usually just see it from the Manhattan skyline.
So I didn't know that Mario Bava was offered the opportunity to direct this film, but I do know that producer Dino De Laurentiis did ask Roman Polanski to direct this film, and that Polanski turned it down. I cannot imagine what the hell a Roman Polanski King Kong would look like. That would have just been insane. I think that
it would have. And I don't think Bava was asked to direct. I think Laurentiis approached him to do the effects. And,
no way.
Yeah. And he didn't want to leave Italy, so he didn't end up taking the job. But either way, I think we would have got that giant bloody monkey scene. But I can't imagine what a Roman Polanski King Kong would look like. What an odd choice.
Well, how about a King Kong 1976 that stars Meryl Streep instead of
Jessica Lange?
Yeah, because Meryl Streep was up for the role,
and Dino thought she wasn't pretty enough. Can you imagine?
He actually said it.
Can you imagine?
He said it right in front of her in Italian, not realizing that she knew Italian, and she heard him and said, "I'm very sorry to have disappointed you," in perfect Italian, because she was fluent.
Yeah. Also, how do you get to be fluent in Italian and you get to be Meryl Streep? Look, you're either drop dead gorgeous, the greatest actress that's ever walked the planet, or you're multilingual, but you don't get to be all of those things. Please, can't Meryl Streep just be a person?
She can also speak German, so.
Of course she can.
I think that any discussion of this movie, you really have to go deep into Dino De Laurentiis, who was Mr. Moneybags on some of the biggest films of the 70s and 80s.
Nobody should go deep into Dino De Laurentiis. Nobody should.
But you got Serpico, Death Wish, Conan the Barbarian, Flash Gordon, David Lynch's Dune, and a ton of Stephen King adaptations. I think it's really neat to think about how he was the original rights holder to Thomas Harris's Hannibal Lecter character. And the one movie that he didn't make was Silence of the Lambs.
Oops.
And I think it just says a lot. His career was super hit or miss. This movie was actually an enormous hit. It made a ton of money. It was pretty well regarded. Critics, freaking Ebert liked it.
If you pull up the YouTube clip of Siskel and Ebert reviewing this, you can tell that most of Ebert's affection for the movie is because Jessica Lange made him feel funny in his khakis. Like, you can tell. You can tell.
That's amazing.
It's really pretty great.
Well, I think it's pretty neat that Dino De Laurentiis, this guy who had started out as an actor in the 40s and then started making movies, like bankrolling films and such, really ended up being as big a name in filmmaking as other famous producers like Irving Thalberg, Robert Evans, Jerry Bruckheimer, Don Simpson. He was a guy who could put movies together. And whether or not they were successful or not, they always did have his brand on them.
Dino, if we're being honest, we have a lot of the most fun parts of the 1980s we kind of have to thank Dino for.
And I have to say, I have something to thank John Gillerman for, because I remember as a young Santo watching this movie and feeling very interesting in my own khakis.
Mm-hmm.
And also he directed Sheena with Tanya Roberts.
You're a menace. You are a menace.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Jason, we both successfully made it off of Skull Island and through Manhattan back to our little recording booth here. And now it is time for us to do our bottom 5 that you offered up for this week's episode.
Yeah, bottom 5 dangerous animals chosen by me and with the approach taken by me for this because King Kong was just not believable in the film. And as a result, I wanted to think on what allegedly dangerous savage beasts populate cinema and just don't work. So that was very simple for me. What is presented as dangerous and simply isn't.
Fair. Yeah, I think I took a similar approach, perhaps. I wove in and out of that idea a little bit, I think.
As you do.
As I do. But why don't you kick us off here with your number 5?
My number 5 goes way back to 1951. And it is a steamy melodrama called Bride of the Gorilla, set in the jungle. I can't with these older films, dude. It's not their fault, but by God, why did some of them even try to take things so seriously? It's not their fault, but this thing it mixes corporate intrigue, lust, and voodoo into this impotent cinematic potion, despite...
Wait a minute. Intrigue, lust, and voodoo?
Yeah.
I'm on board so far.
Yeah, until the fucking monkey shows up.
Oh, yeah,
right?
okay, the monkey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Raymond Burr is in this thing. He's like a plantation owner. I know. And
that's gross.
And Lon Chaney Jr.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, man. I mean, this thing is pumped full of interesting talent. Kurt Siodmak, the director, was actually the guy that made The Wolfman and Donovan's Brain. So, I mean, you've got pedigree, but then when it was shot in 10 days.
Right.
It doesn't really feel like it's in a jungle. It feels like it's in the backwoods lot somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
The transformation here is Burr turning into a gorilla after he is cursed by a voodoo woman for skullduggery. He basically steals his former boss's wife at the plantation, whatever. So he keeps turning into this gorilla and killing people and such. And then at the very end, you see the damn thing and you can actually see the seams of the costume.
Oh,
and
no.
It's just it just destroys itself at the end. It's laughable. So yeah, Bride of the Gorilla from 1951 and my number 5.
What made you pick that over? You had a lot of those kind of movies to choose from. What about that one jumps out at you?
I think specifically for that, and you're absolutely right. I did pick this one specifically because there were so many others. I was trying not to go with cryptids, which limited my ability to go after just animals. This one is...
I think I did the same. Yeah, I think that I didn't realize it, but yes, I think I also tried to go with actual animals.
So once you cut out all of the cryptids, it really minimizes how much you have. This movie is interesting because it takes it really fucking seriously and then fails so unbelievably miserably. If it was campy all the way through, then you wouldn't mind as much. But the fact that it just fails and falls so flat on its face at the end really sets it apart. Plus, it's one of the few that I've seen all the way through. So
sure, right? Yeah, I guess completing the film is a task with those things for sure. Well, a movie that I don't ever have trouble finishing because I love it is the film from which I draw my number 5. Because for me, a lion should be terrifying. A lion is big and ferocious and dangerous, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Prince John, the sniveling mama's boy from 1973's Walt Disney production of Robin Hood, is by no means a dangerous animal. Prince John is a lion. He's a king. He should be roaring, but instead he's this thumb-sucking coward who's always calling for mommy.
Mommy, I've got a dirty thumb.
Even as a kid, I remember thinking that Prince John was a total tool with his crown falling down over his eyes and constantly crying, which honestly is a credit to the vocal performance by the incredible Peter Ustinov. That's right.
Holy.
Hercule Poirot himself.
Wow.
Peter Ustinov, get ready for this. Are you ready? 4 Oscars, 4 BAFTAs, 5 Emmys, 3 Golden Awards, 4 Grammys, 2 Tonys.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that's why for me, I think I loved this whimpering portrayal of Prince John the Lion in one of my absolute favorite Disney animated films.
Great choice, man. Great choice. Well, my number 4 is Congo. From director Frank Marshall, 1995 flick that was nominated for 7 Razzies. It was sort of a follow-up to like Jurassic Park for the Amblin crowd, which it pretty much failed in every way to capture the character, the magic, or the adventure of the Michael Crichton, Steven Spielberg combo. Here you have Frank Marshall, who's best known for helming 1993's harrowing survival epic Alive. And your least favorite movie of all time, Arachnophobia. He seems lost when it comes to making these mutant gray gorillas that he needed to make threatening. They just look like dudes in suits. I mean, which is really weird because the character design is really good, right? It's Stan Winston. So they look kind of neat, the faces. But again, they're rigid. They're not really moving. And everything feels fake. Like the sets feel fake. It looks like an old classic Trek set.
Yep.
And all the suits just look like dudes trying to pretend they move like humans do. And they run around slapping. It has an amazing cast, like a completely insanely good cast. Laura Linney is like the lead actress in it. But then you're Tim Curry, Ernie Hudson, and Bruce freaking Campbell. Are you kidding me?
The Chin himself.
And yet it's all kind of unwatchable. It really is. And it's because nothing seems real. At any moment, any one of these gray gorillas is going to slap a rock and it's just going to be hollow inside. So because it's just all so artificial, I chose Congo. Really pulled me out of the movie.
I'm starting to notice a trend, Jason. You really seem to have it out for the primates.
It does seem that way. I didn't even realize it, but yeah, fake primates, man.
My number 4 is Cocaine Bear from Cocaine Bear.
For sure. Yep.
It's not even necessarily about Cocaine Bear, but this one represents all those animal attack movies where the punchline is that it actually exists.
Yeah.
Your velocipastors, your zombievers, your snakes on a plane, beyond the joke, these flicks just don't have any reason to exist. There was a time when I'd get a laugh out of that kind of thing, but that time isn't now. I know a lot of people liked Cocaine Bear. I think they had fun with it, but there's just something, I don't know, idiocracy about the whole thing that just I can't get down with at this point in my life. So my number 4 is Cocaine Bear.
It's a funny enough movie. It's incredibly violent. And I agree with you. And you've talked about this before. You come up with a good title, you don't have to make the movie. Nobody really needed to see it.
Pulled from the headlines, this one. Just pulled from the headlines.
And extremely exaggerated. My number 3 is the most obvious on my list, and the one that I think that you and I would both pick, and that would be Night of the Lepus from 1972. Good Lord, is this thing just an absolute clunker? You know, it comes from a workman director named Robert F. Claxton, who's best known for working with his good buddy Michael Landon on Bonanza and Highway to Heaven episodes. This killer rabbit movie has a surprisingly decent cast. It's got Janet Leigh, Rory Calhoun, and fucking DeForest Kelley, which is, I got my Trek references just keep happening here tonight. They're all slumming and failing to lend this thing any gravitas. It's a perfect example of what I wanted to talk about when I picked this bottom 5, because slow motion bunnies hopping around through half-zero scale sets with lion roars dubbed over their rampage is just, it's beyond silly. I will say that it's worth seeing to believe it. You know, it's just one of those things. The filmmakers fail completely at making these rabbits look at all threatening. And there's this quick intercutting that they do with the pouncing rabbits, and then like people writhing with fur stuffed animals like stuck with blood. And it's so ludicrous that it makes me think back to when Monty Python and the Holy Grail played the same gag for laughs at the cave of Caerbannog. More than once, I wondered if someone was going to pull out the holy hand grenade of Antioch during Night of the Lepus, but instead they just tried and failed with using like standard TNT. It's a god-awful movie. It really is. And there's just simply nothing scary about rabbits.
Yeah, this one, I almost went with a similar movie because it didn't end up on my list, but I think this movie is probably the top of the pile for these 1970s regular animals attack. I almost went with frogs.
Yeah.
Because it's the same kind of thing. In that one, all of the animals in the world are turning on the human species, but we just get a lot of scenes of frogs being like, and then jumping a little bit.
Right, exactly.
It's ludicrous. It's ludicrous.
Yeah.
So but I think Night of the Lepus is the one.
Yeah.
My number 3 is my cheat. You know, I can't resist a good cheat here. I decided not to do dangerous animals here, but instead to do animals in danger. So my number 3 are the cats and dogs in the 1986 family film, The Adventures of Milo and Otis. Yeah.
Dork.
Can you, dork nothing. Can you imagine the heartbreak when I found out that my favorite animal adventure movie from when I was 5 was actually a glorified snuff video?
Oh.
Yeah. The Adventures of Milo and Otis was a Japanese production, and there's a lot of questions about animal rights groups being on the set or not being on the set, looking out for the welfare of the puppies and kittens. But even a simple viewing of the movie makes it pretty clear that these animals were just meat for the Otis and Milo machine.
Oh.
Yeah, allegedly, I will use the word allegedly, 20 kittens were killed during the production of the movie. Yeah. One was sent over a 100-foot cliff. Now, it's never been definitively proved, and it could be taken as Hollywood myth, I guess, but this was pre-CGI. So what you're seeing is what is happening. And there are scenes of animals going over waterfalls. There's a scene of a pug fighting a bear, and I don't care who you are or how well trained those animals are, the dog looks terrified. The animals look terrified. So for me, even a casual viewing makes it obvious that these animals were in harm's way. At best terrified, at worst maybe killed. So my number 3 are animals in danger. Milo and Otis, 1986.
Damn, that's a great pick. And that's really smart. Honestly, I don't mind the inversion and the cheat because that's a brilliant pick. And it's a bit of film knowledge, film history that I didn't know about.
That's the thing. You watch it again and you'd be like, oh, dear God, hold on a second now. Because I saw it when I was a kid and then didn't watch it, obviously, for decades until I had kids. And when I sat down with my daughter to watch it, I was blown away at how in peril these animals very obviously were the whole time. That's what made me do a little bit of Googling to find out that I wasn't wrong. They were just churning through cats. Yeah, not great.
Well, returning to the theme as proper, I'm going to talk about 1997's Graveyard Shift. It's an absolute god-awful adaptation of the Stephen King short story. I managed to catch this 1990 debacle in the movie theater.
Well done.
And if I'm not mistaken, it might be the first truly terrible film I ever saw at the cinema proper. In many ways, Graveyard Shift suffers from the same problem as Night of the Lepus, in that it cannot make its allegedly dangerous animals scary. Now, this could be a personal thing, but I think rats and mice are cute. So even when you're cutting from a screaming victim to their little faces near some fake blood, it's just not convincing to me. And what's funny is I know that were it a real situation, those motherfuckers would be eating you. You know what I mean? So I get it, but it just doesn't work. It doesn't look convincing. They're too cute looking with their little squeaky little whiskers and the beady little eyes and stuff. They just don't bother me at all. But what this movie does is it tries to up the ante with this giant mutant rat that's living in the basement of this textile mill in Maine. Let's just say that this director, this guy, Ralph S. Singleton, this is his only directorial effort, aside from 2 episodes of Cagney and Lacey.
That was worth the pick right there.
So just imagine a guy who helmed 2 episodes of Cagney and Lacey out of what, like 400 episodes that exist of that show. And then he goes on to make a killer rat movie with a giant mutant rat that attacks people. That mutant rat looks about as bad as you would think it would look.
I bet that guy's office was a real hoot. Like just a big poster from the movie and then just lots of stills from Cagney and Lacey. The 2 episodes that he directed. Oh man, that's pretty fun. That's a good pick. That is pretty good. My number 2 is my Jaws ripoff pick. I had to have a dangerous animal in here representing all of those films that came after the success of Jaws, when we just saw a bombardment of knockoffs and imitators. Lots of piranhas, some crocodiles, a few grizzly bears, at least one killer jellyfish man that I know of. But for me, the best representative of the Jaws ripoff is alligator, not orca. Orca actually is kind of not that bad. Maybe that's a conversation for another day, but alligator. This is like one of those crazy Roger Corman films where they blow up anything they can find and fire 1 billion bullets in the course of the movie, but there's also a giant rubber alligator around the whole time eating people. Robert Forster is the lead in this movie. Like, he can act, but you know what he can't act along with is an enormous rubber alligator that the first design dried out and disintegrated, right?
Oh, jeez.
So they had to make another one. The second one, they used this super thick rubber so it wouldn't dry out. But then because it was so bulky, they had to put a steel frame on it, which made it weigh a ton and they couldn't move it. So they ended up, and this is true, hiring NFL linemen to get inside the thing and like kind of push it along from the legs, kind of like, you know, like the front of the horse and the back of the horse costume sort of thing. But it just looked prancy and made everybody laugh. So they ended up using a bunch of miniatures of the alligator and POV shots. And when you do see the thing, it looks like a goddamn Chuck E. Cheese animatronic. So I think that for me, out of all of those Jaws knockoffs, alligator is number 2 on my list.
Nifty choice. Well, my number 1 plays right into what you were just talking about, those Jaws ripoffs, and there is no bigger Jaws ripoff than Jaws the Revenge.
Oh boy.
Third sequel in the Jaws franchise. If ever there was a thoroughly incompetent portrayal of a dangerous animal, you look no further than this movie, which famously sported the tagline, "This time it's personal."
Oh boy.
It's directed by a relative nobody named Joseph Sargent, who, after directing Jaws 4, turned his entire focus to just helming only TV movies.
How many episodes of Cagney and Lacey do you think he did?
It's a good question. I wonder. The ending of Jaws 4 pits the title shark against the now widowed Ellen Brody, as well as Michael fucking Caine and Mario Van Peebles. Now, Michael Caine famously said once about Jaws 4, something along the lines of, well, no, I've never seen Jaws 4, but I have seen the beautiful house that it bought me.
Yeah.
This movie is an absolute mess. It involves this, the ending of it involves this like seaplane that's sinking and the most laughable reemergence of a thought dead character this side of Chewie and the Rise of Skywalker. It's well known how much trouble Spielberg had with Bruce the Shark while filming the original Jaws, and those technical challenges led to a show-less plan that significantly amped up the suspense. Jaws 4 could have learned a lot from Spielberg, because if you just watched that one really hilarious banana boat sequence, which shows like a really stiff, non-articulating shark launch itself out of the water, and then it gently snatches an unsuspecting and equally stiff young woman from off a banana boat that is otherwise filled with children. Hilarious. But, on the plus side, I thought it was funny that one YouTube viewer of this clip, because you can find it out on YouTube, proclaimed that even though it's fake looking, he's afraid of animatronics. So it was still terrifying to him.
Well done. On the heels of that, as I get into my number one, I'm actually now disappointed that I didn't have a different number one, because now you've got me thinking of the shark in the Batman movie with the shark spray. It's just a rubber shark stuck on Adam West's leg as he's dangling off that helicopter.
I forgot about that. That's a great one.
Yeah, I wish it had been my number one. But that's what you reminded me of. But it's not my number one. Before I give my number one, I think I'd like to do something momentous. Something we don't take lightly here at Film Jitsu. Yes, my number one pick for this list, I would like to, after we are done here, induct into the Film Jitsu Hall of Lame.
Oh.
Because the honor goes to, of course, the shit weasels. I thought for sure we were going to have the same number one from director Lawrence. I wrote Raiders of the Lost Ark and Return of the Jedi and The Empire Strikes Back Kasdan, based on the Stephen King story Dreamcatcher. Yep, that's right. We've mentioned the shit weasels a shitload on this show. I think it's time to bestow them with the honor of not just being my number one for our bottom 5 animals, but also a place in the coveted hall of the Film Jitsu Hall of Lame.
Do they just go in on the page, the shit weasels, or do we say the Dreamcatcher is in the?
I mean, no, just the shit weasels. We cannot talk about the shit weasels anymore. That's it. They're off limits now. We bring them up all the time. First it was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Now it's the shit weasels. We're all done with the shit weasels now.
Well, Mike, thanks very much for a spirited bottom 5 list. I did not expect that we were going to be inducting something into the Hall of Lame this time around, and I'm happy that we will never, ever have to talk about the shit weasels ever again. That's a very good thing for both of us, I think, in the long run. For our Kick 2 Pick 2, it is directly related to the fucking shit weasels.
Okay. Oh, good.
Because playing off the theme of King Kong, we will be doing a round of Kick 2, Pick 2 of Stephen King properties. Get it? King.
Okay.
All right, there you go.
Yes. Yep.
Yes.
All right.
So therefore, I'm going to take 4 Stephen King movies, and in this time, for some random reason, I've decided to make it impossibly hard for myself. So I don't know how difficult it's going to be for you. But for me, this is going to be enormously challenging. The 4 films are Dolores Claiborne, Pet Sematary, The Dead Zone, and Misery.
Wow. Okay.
So it's a diverse group. I did not include some of the really, really well-known, really popular, like Stand By Me or The Shawshank Redemption. I'm going to let those lie for another Kick 2, Pick 2 in the future, I'm sure. But where do you live with these 4 movies? Are there any that are easy for you to knock off?
Despite what I would imagine our listening audience would say, no, because I think initial reaction might be that Dolores Claiborne is an easy out given the body of King's work.
No way.
But it's not for me. It's a very good film. And I actually have a special attachment to Dolores Claiborne because it came out in 1995 when I would have been, I think, 14. And my aunt took me to see it in the theater. So I have a really vivid and favorable horror movie with my aunt at the theater memory wrapped up in Dolores Claiborne, despite how disturbing and upsetting the content of the movie is. So it's not easy for me to just knock that one out.
For me, Dolores Claiborne is almost impossible to knock out because I think it is an exceptionally well-made, well-acted, well-told, interesting story that defies genre in many respects. It is not, it doesn't take any easy roads out. It has one of the most frightening and weird scenes ever when Jennifer Jason Leigh is looking into that mirror and then sees the back of her own head. Oh my God. I just got goosebumps when I just talked about it just now.
Yeah.
It's such compelling filmmaking.
Let's hang on to it right now. I think as hard as it's going to be, I'm going to let Pet Sematary go. I'm going to let Pet Sematary go. This is a hard one. I'm going to let Pet Sematary go from my list. It's very scary, especially all the Zelda stuff, which isn't necessarily even the plot of them. It's not the point. It's kind of a sidebar, and it's the scariest part. But I think I'm going to be able to let that one go just because I hold the rest of these in such high esteem.
I don't know that I can just kick Pet Sematary. Although I will say, out of these 4 movies, it's the least satisfying in terms of its ending. It has a real misfire at the end. And so I think I'm with you. Even though I think it has one of the best sequences of any of these 4 movies, and that would be the scene when Gage gets hit by the car, the truck.
It's the scariest of the 4 movies. It's definitely the scariest of the 4 movies.
But that scene was so well and cleverly handled. Really. And I will say the Pet Sematary second movie was quite good, so that would still live. So yeah, I'm going to kick the first one. That's tough to do.
Okay.
I don't feel good about it.
Is there a world in which you can get rid of the Dead Zone?
No. Okay. I don't.
All right, so we're locked in on the Dead Zone.
No, because it is my favorite Stephen King adaptation, I think.
Yeah, it's...
I mean, Christopher Walken he's just brilliant, and it's probably my favorite Cronenberg movie. Right up there with A History of Violence. No, I don't think I could ever kick the Dead Zone.
Then here's what I'm going to do. I think we're going to play the odds. I am going to go with the Dead Zone and Misery. In the hopes that you will go with the Dead Zone and Dolores Claiborne. But you do you. But I'm going to go with Misery because I think that Kathy Bates' performance is just undeniable.
Paul, do you know about the early days at the Kimberley diamond mines? Do you know what they did to the native workers who stole diamonds? Don't worry, they didn't kill them. That would be like junking a Mercedes just because it had a broken spring. No, if they caught them, they had to make sure they could go on working, but they also had to make sure they could never run away. The operation was called hobbling.
I read that novel in one sitting. I sat down and didn't stop reading until I got to the end of the book. I think some of the changes that they made were actually probably good decisions for a film. Really wonderful.
Misery, I think I struggle with kicking, but I do like, we have 2 Kathy Bates on this list. And so I think I am team Dolores Claiborne. It's weird. I think I'm choosing it in part because of the music score by Danny Elfman. It's one of his very best. Misery is a fantastic movie. James Caan is brilliant, but it's a very one-dimensional film in many respects. It's excellent. This is not a judgment. This is merely me trying to figure out how to cut it. At the end of the day, I don't think I could ever kick Dolores Claiborne or The Dead Zone. They are two of my, not just my favorite King adaptations, but two of my absolute favorite movies, period. Dolores Claiborne, The Dead Zone for me, The Dead Zone, and Misery for you.
And for our listeners out there, what we would love for you to do is let us know, what's your kick to pick to? Here's what I think you should do. Grab your phone, open up the voice memo app on your phone, give us a recording of your pick to kick to, and send it on into us, jay@filmjitsu.net. We want to hear from you. Which two are you keeping and which one are you sending off into the Phantom Zone? Let us know. Jason, it's that part of the show where I get to tell you what film you're going to watch as payback for King Kong 1976. If I'm being honest, it's one of my favorite parts of the show, the big reveal for what comes next. We've been off to a weird start in 2024. We've watched some weird flicks. We have watched the Repo, the Genetic Opera, and the Disappointments Room, Hardcore Henry. I think King Kong can make a claim for being kind of weird. Yeah. Well, I'm just going to keep that rolling. And I think maybe you are going to watch the weirdest one we have had thus far. I am giving you, from 2022, directed by Alex Garland, you're going to watch Men.
Really? It's on my list of things to watch. It's things I want to see this movie.
You should want to see this movie, and I can't wait to talk about this movie, because the reason I'm giving you this film is because I had a singular film-going experience. This movie came out right kind of after the pandemic, like theaters were just sort of opening up again. There was me and one other guy in the room. We sat rows apart from each other. The movie played, the movie ended. The credits rolled. We sat there in stunned silence. The lights came up. He turns, he looks at me. He says, "Are you okay?" I said, "I'm not real sure." And we got up and left without another word.
Holy shit.
Starring Jessie Buckley, who our listeners probably know from the Fargo TV show or Women Talking, The Lost Daughter, were both Oscar-nominated films. She was Oscar-nominated for Best Supporting Actress for The Lost Daughter. And Rory Kinnear, who's an extremely prolific British actor of the screen and stage. Here's what I will tell you. The IMDb description of this film is, a young woman goes on a solo vacation to the English countryside following the death of her ex-husband. Wow, did they leave a lot out, and I cannot wait for you to find out what that is, because let's just say she encounters several strange locals in the quiet little hamlet she's vacationing in, or does she?
All right.
Our bottom 5, and I hope this leads to more questions than answers before you watch the film. Our bottom 5 is going to be our bottom 5 transformations.
Okay. That's very open. You can read that in all sorts of cool ways. So that's fun.
You sure can. Well, have fun with it.
I feel like stunned silence is a way of punishment for sure. So I can see where you're going with this. It's a very unique way. You've never done anything quite this cerebral before. So I just want to talk about this movie. I I'm not convinced that I've given you a bad film. I don't know what I think. I was going to say, I'm not even sure you know what you think, but I think at the end of the day, what Film Jitsu is about is forcing each other to think about some stuff that is sometimes kind of uncomfortable to think about and talk about.
It wasn't supposed to be that way. It was just supposed to be hotties and naughties and hotels for dogs and dick and fart jokes, and somehow we ended up doing this. I don't know how we got off on this foot, but we're here now, and we're just going to keep it going.
Let's hope that I hate it so we can have a spirited discussion and you can get on with your day.
I feel comfortable that no matter what happens, you are going to have, as I can always count on, very strong opinions. So I can't wait for our listeners to check that out. I hope they will all come back next week when you will be watching Alex Garland's Men. Until then, we have been your hosts. I am Mike.
And I am Jay.
We'll see you next time.
Stalno mislim na te, hoću znat sve kate, vježbat ću sate i sate. Karate, vježbat ću dok zadnji mi kjaj.
I thought maybe you could give us 4 Stephen King movies.
Kings.
Yeah, or movies about kings if you have 3 other movies to go along with King Ralph real fast. I don't know.
Sorry. King Ralph.